The musty smell clinging to the basement floorboards seemed to carry with it all the memories Andrew Allen had tried to bury over the past 25 years. Each swing of the hammer against the old wood echoed like a blow to his chest, reverberating through the empty house that no longer held his mother's laughter or his father's affectionate grumbling. The patriarch's sudden death 3 weeks prior had left the family shattered, but it was Andrew who took on the painful task of clearing out the house where he'd grown up, where his sister Lily used to play with dolls in the backyard, where she taught him to tie his shoelaces when he was just 6. The hammer slipped from his sweaty hands as a board gave way more easily than expected, revealing a dark hole in the floor. Andrew knelt, ignoring the ache in his knees that betrayed his 44 years, and reached into the gap. His fingers touched something solid, cold, buried there for God knows how long. It was a small wooden box, no bigger than a book, with rusty hinges and a simple latch that opened with a dry click. Inside, like relics of a life interrupted, lay a VHS tape with a yellowed label on which someone had scrawled Rahma in shaky letters, and a letter folded in 4, the paper yellowed with age. Andrew's hands trembled as he recognized Lily's handwriting, those round, careful letters he'd known since childhood. The date in the upper right corner nearly stopped his heart. March 15th, 1996. Andrew, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means you found what I hid. I know Mom and Dad never believed I'd come back, but you always knew, didn't you? You always knew I wouldn't abandon them willingly. What I've discovered here in Lebanon is bigger and more terrifying than any of us could imagine. Samir isn't who I thought he was. In fact, nothing here is what it seems. I'm writing in a hurry because I feel like I don't have much time. If anything happens to me, please don't let them forget me. And if you decide to look for me someday, start with the tape. It has the answers you're looking for, but also the dangers I faced. I love you more than anything, my brother. Take care, Lily. The handwriting grew shakier with each line, as if written by someone in a hurry or afraid. Andrew held the letter to his chest, feeling the fragile paper conform to the shape of his ribs, and for a moment he was again the 14-year-old boy who would wake up in the middle of the night, hoping to hear Lily climbing the stairs, returning from another one of her nighttime adventures around their small town. Oak Haven had always been a place where nothing happened, where people knew each other by their first and last names, where secrets lasted a week at most before spreading through the town square. That's why Lily's sudden infatuation with Samir, Khalil, the exchange student who arrived in town in 1994 to study agronomy at the local college, caused such a stir. He was unlike anything the town had ever seen. Dark-haired, with intense dark eyes, he spoke Portuguese with an accent that made women sigh in bank lines and supermarket aisles. Lily, who had always been the studious girl, the exemplary daughter who helped at church and got perfect grades in her education degree, transformed into someone Andrew barely recognized. She spent hours combing her brown hair until it shone. Like silk, she tried on perfumes she bought secretly in Chicago, and her eyes gained a sparkle Andrew had never seen before. It was as if she had awakened from a deep sleep and discovered she was alive. Lily's parents, John and Mary Allen, devout and conservative Catholics like most families in the region, watched with growing unease their daughter's relationship with a Muslim foreigner. Arguments at home became constant, always in hushed tones, so the neighbors wouldn't hear, but Andrew picked up every word through the thin walls of the house. "This infatuation will pass," her mother would say. "It's a young girl thing. She'll come to her senses." But her father was more direct. "I don't want that man setting foot in this house. He'll drag our daughter away from us." Prophetic, as only parental fears can be. When Samir finished his exchange program in December 1994 and announced he was returning to Lebanon, Lily made a decision that would split the Allen family in two. On a cold January morning in 1995, she left a note on the kitchen table saying she was leaving with him, that she loved him more than life itself, and that she would return as soon as they could officially marry. "Don't worry about me," she wrote. Samir said Lebanon is beautiful this time of year and that his family will welcome me like a daughter. Andrew vividly remembered the morning they found the note. His mother collapsed in the kitchen chair, sobbing as if at a funeral, while his father stormed out of the house and only returned after midnight, smelling of whiskey and with bloodshot eyes. It was Andrew, still a 14-year-old teenager, who had to call the police, who had to repeat the story dozens of times to officers, investigators, and later to employees of the Brazilian consulate. The answer was always the same. Lily was of age. She had left a note explaining her decision, and there was no evidence of crime or coercion. It was a case of voluntary disappearance. They filed it away without much ceremony. When Lebanese authorities were contacted 3 months later, they reported that there was no record of a Brazilian woman named Leticia Alencar entering the country. Samir Khalil also seemed to have disappeared from official records. During the first few years, Andrew wrote letters to embassies, contacted human rights organizations, and even hired a private investigator with the money he'd saved from after-school jobs. Nothing. It was as if Lily had been swallowed by the earth, as if she'd never existed beyond the memories he carried. Over time, his parents stopped talking about her. Her photos were put away in boxes. Her bedroom became an office, and the Allen family learned to live with a hole in their hearts that never fully healed. Andrew married Carla, a sweet teacher he met in the state capital at 28. He had 2 children and built a seemingly normal life, but every night before bed, he looked at the sky and wondered where his sister was. Now, at 44, divorced for 3 years, and with his children living with his ex-wife in São Paulo, adapted to Chicago, Andrew held in his hands the proof that Lily had thought of him until the very end. The VHS tape weighed more than it should, as if made of lead instead of plastic. He climbed from the basement, legs trembling, and went to the living room, where an old television with a VCR still sat, used by his parents to re-watch family wedding and birthday videos. He inserted the tape with reverential care, like handling a bomb about to explode. The screen flickered a few times before showing the grainy image of Lily, thinner than he remembered, her hair pulled back in a low bun, wearing a simple white shirt that seemed too small for her body. She was sitting in a place Andrew didn't recognize, a kind of veranda overlooking arid mountains and stone buildings that looked centuries old. "Andrew," she said, and the voice was exactly as he remembered, with that sweet, slightly husky tone she'd always had. "If you're seeing this, it means you found what I hid. I know you never gave up looking for me, even when everyone else did." She smiled, but it was a sad smile, etched with wrinkles that shouldn't have been on the face of a 20-year-old girl. "I should have listened to you when you said Samir seemed to be hiding something. You were always smarter than me." The camera shook slightly, as if held by nervous hands. Andrew realized that Lily was filming herself, probably using a borrowed or stolen camera. In the background, he could hear strange sounds, chanting in a language he didn't recognize, distant drums, and occasionally screams that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. "Lebanon isn't as Samir described it," Lily continued, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "We arrived in Beirut in February, but he didn't take me to meet his family as promised. Instead, we traveled inland to a mountain village called Kadisha. He said he needed to take care of some things before introducing me to his parents, that it was a matter of tradition." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound, devoid of joy. "What an idiot I was, Andrew, what an idiot." The image began to shake more violently, and Andrew realized Lily was crying. Tears streamed down her face as she continued speaking, her voice choked by sobs that broke Andrew's heart. "Samir is part of a group, They call themselves the Guardians of the Veil. At first I thought it was some kind of religious organization, you know. Like those youth groups at church, only Muslim. But it's not, Andrew. It's nothing like that. She leaned closer to the camera, and Andrew could see purple marks on her neck, as if someone had tried to strangle her. They worship something ancient, something that shouldn't exist, and they believe I'm special, that I can help them awaken this thing. The transmission began to fail, the image cutting in and out at irregular intervals. During the cuts, Andrew glimpsed other images, hooded figures walking in circles around a bonfire, strange symbols carved into stone walls, and always, Lily's eyes growing more frightened and desperate. "They keep me in a house in the village," her voice returned, now lower, almost a whisper. "I'm not a prisoner, not exactly, but I can't leave. Samir says it's for my protection, that the villagers haven't fully accepted me yet, but I know it's a lie. I know because..." The transmission cut again, and when it returned, Lily was clearly in a different place, a closed, dark environment where only her face was illuminated by a dim light. "I managed to steal this camera from the office of their leader, a man named Hassan. He speaks Portuguese, can you believe it? He said he studied in Brazil in the 70s before finding his true calling." She laughed again, that terrible hollow sound. Calling, that's what he calls it, as if torturing people is a noble profession. Andrew paused the tape, his hands trembling so much he could barely hold the remote. He got up and went to the kitchen, needing a glass of water, fresh air, anything to bring him back to reality. But the reality was that his sister had suffered, had probably died, and he had spent 25 years without knowing. When he returned to the living room, breathing more slowly, he pressed play again. The image now showed what appeared to be a nocturnal ritual. Hooded figures danced around a stone structure that Andrew couldn't fully identify, but which gave him an inexplicable feeling of nausea. The chants were louder now, more urgent, and among the voices he could clearly hear someone screaming in despair. "They do this every new moon," Lily's voice narrated over the images. "They bring people. Sacrifices, they call them. People nobody will miss. Homeless people, prostitutes, foreigners lost in the mountains." Then, a long pause, only the sound of chanting filling the silence. "Samir said I'd be different, that my sacrifice would have a greater purpose, that it would help open the veil between worlds. What a romantic idiot I was, Andrew. I thought he was talking about marriage, about a special ceremony." The camera moved, focusing on something that made Andrew choke. It was a stone wall covered in carved symbols, but in the center was something he recognized immediately, an eye inside a six-pointed star, exactly as Lily had described in the letter. But up close, he realized it wasn't just a decorative symbol. The eye seemed to move, blinking slowly as if alive. "You're seeing this, Andrew?" Lily's voice was filled with panic now. "Please tell me you're seeing this. I'm not going crazy, am I? This symbol, it moves. It watches me. At night when I try to sleep, I can feel it watching me through the walls." The image began to shake violently as if Lily was running. Andrew could hear her heavy breathing, her bare feet hitting against stones. "They found out I took the camera," she whispered urgently. "I need to hide this before..." A deafening scream cut her words short, a sound that didn't seem entirely human. The camera fell to the ground, showing only stones and dust. But the audio continued, capturing the sounds of a struggle, cries of pain, and finally, Samir's voice speaking in Arabic to someone. "Lily!" Andrew shouted at the television, as if his voice could cross 25 years and save her. "Run! Please run!" But the tape had ended, leaving only static on the screen and a silence that weighed on Andrew like a tombstone. He rewound and watched again, then once more, memorizing every detail, every word, every second of his sister's desperate message. When he finally turned off the television, the sun had already set, and the house was plunged into darkness. Andrew spent the night awake, walking through the empty rooms of the house where he'd grown up, holding Lily's letter like a talisman. Every shadow seemed to hide secrets. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like the footsteps of intruders. For the first time in 25 years, he was absolutely certain that Lily hadn't abandoned him willingly. She had been kidnapped, tortured, and probably killed by religious fanatics in a distant country where no one cared about a missing Brazilian woman. But Andrew cared, and now he had clues. In the following days, Andrew immersed himself in obsessive research about Lebanon, about religious sects, about anything that could connect the dots left by Lily. He discovered that Qadisha was real, a mountainous region in the north of the country known for its ancient monasteries and for being historically a refuge for persecuted religious groups. He also discovered that Rahma meant mercy in Arabic, but in certain mystical contexts it could refer to a state of purification through suffering. As for the guardians of the veil, information was scarcer. He found vague references in internet forums about esoteric Middle Eastern groups, mentions in academic books about syncretic sects that mixed Islam with pre-Islamic practices, but nothing concrete. It was as if the group existed in the shadows, invisible to the outside world. The symbol Lily had filmed, however, appeared in several different contexts. The eye inside the six-pointed star was an ancient symbol, used by various esoteric traditions throughout history. But the specific combination he'd seen on the tape, with those proportions and details, appeared in only one place: a medieval manuscript preserved in the National Library of Beirut, part of a treatise on the opening of the celestial veils, written by a Syrian monk in the 13th century. Andrew printed everything he found, creating a file that grew day by day: maps of Lebanon, photographs of Qadisha, articles on archaeology in the region, lists of minority religious groups. His home workspace transformed into a command center, covered in papers, photographs, and a large photo of Lily at 19, smiling at the camera on their last Christmas together. It was then that he made the decision that would change his life forever. He would go to Lebanon to look for her. The decision wasn't impulsive. Andrew had saved money over the years, working as an accountant at a firm in Chicago, living modestly and saving religiously. After the divorce, his expenses decreased even further. He had enough for a long trip, maybe a few months in the Middle East if necessary. Carla, his ex-wife, thought he was having a nervous breakdown. Andrew, this happened 25 years ago, she said when he called to tell her about his decision. Your sister probably died, and you need to accept that. Think about your children. They need a present father, not someone chasing ghosts on the other side of the world. But Andrew had already made his decision. He took leave from work, organized his documents, learned a few basic Arabic phrases, and on a cold June morning, he was at O'Hare International Airport with a small suitcase and a briefcase full of papers and photographs. His destination, Beirut, Lebanon. The flight was long and turbulent, but Andrew barely noticed the discomfort. He spent his time reviewing his notes, memorizing maps, and imagining what it would be like to set foot on the land where Lily had lived her last days. When the plane finally landed at Rafik Hariri International Airport, the sun was rising over the Lebanese mountains, painting the sky in golden hues that resembled his sister's eyes. Beirut was a city of contrasts that left Andrew stunned in his first few days. Modern skyscrapers rose beside bullet-riddled buildings from the Civil War. Late-model Mercedes-Benzes shared the streets with donkeys carrying vegetables, and the scent of exotic spices mingled with the aroma of gasoline and sea. It was a place where the old and the new constantly collided, where every corner told a different story. Andrew stayed at a modest hotel in the city center and spent his first few days acclimating. His first stop was the Brazilian embassy, where he was greeted by a friendly but not particularly optimistic official. "Cases like your sister's are complicated," the diplomat explained, "especially when there are no official records of entry into the country. It's possible she crossed the border illegally through Syria, which was common in the 90s. The official gave him a list of organizations that helped families of missing persons, but made it clear that the possibilities were limited. 25 years is a long time, he said gently, and Lebanon has gone through a lot of changes since then. Andrew wasn't discouraged. He hired a local translator, a young man named Khalil. The irony of the name wasn't lost on him, who spoke fluent Portuguese and knew the Qadisha region well. Khalil was a journalism student at the American University of Beirut and was always on the lookout for interesting stories. Leticia's case immediately fascinated him. "Groups like these Veil Guardians aren't uncommon in our region," Khalil explained as they drove toward the northern mountains, especially in rural areas where old traditions are still strong. During the Civil War, many strange groups formed. Some were political, others religious, and some were just crazy. The trip to Qadisha took 3 hours on winding roads that climbed into the mountains, offering spectacular views of verdant valleys and villages that seemed frozen in time. As they moved further from Beirut, the modern world fell away, replaced by landscapes that likely hadn't changed much in centuries. Qadisha proved to be a region of stark and majestic beauty. Known as the Holy Valley, it was dotted with ancient monasteries carved into the rocks, some still functioning, others abandoned for centuries. The limestone mountains rose like natural towers, and Andrew could easily imagine how the place attracted both pilgrims and fugitives. "Your sister would have stood out here," Khalil remarked as they walked through the main village. "A young Brazilian woman. People would remember her." And they did. It was surprising to Andrew how many people still held memories of Lily. An old woman selling bread in the central square remembered the sad girl with big eyes, who always bought the same kind of bread every day. A mechanic recalled seeing her a few times with that man from the mountains, always with her head down, never smiling. But it was a woman named Mariam, owner of a small cafe, who provided the most disturbing information. She immediately remembered Lily when Andrew showed her photograph. "Of course I remember her," Mariam said in Arabic, which Khalil translated. "She used to come here sometimes, trying to use the payphone to call Brazil, but she could never get through. She said someone always cut the line." Mariam paused, studying Andrew's face. She was scared. "She once asked me if I knew a way to leave the village without anyone knowing. She said she thought she was being watched." Andrew felt a pang in his chest. "And did you help her?" Mariam shook her head sadly. "I wanted to, but those men, the ones she was with, they weren't people to trifle with. Everyone in the village knew them. Everyone feared them." "The Veil Guardians?" Andrew asked directly. The effect was immediate. Mariam paled and looked nervously around the cafe, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. She whispered something quickly to Khalil, who frowned. "She says that name shouldn't be spoken here," Khalil translated, "and that you should leave before they find out you're asking questions." But Andrew wasn't willing to leave, not when he was so close to uncovering the truth about Lily. He insisted that Mariam tell him more, promising that no one would know she had spoken to him. Finally, the woman agreed to meet him after sunset in a more secluded location. The meeting took place in an abandoned monastery in the mountains, a place Mariam said was safe because they avoided Christian holy sites. By the light of candles she had brought, her face looked even more worried and aged. Through Khalil, she told Andrew a story that made him question whether he should have left the past buried. "The Veil Guardians have existed for a long time," Mariam began. "My grandfather spoke of them when I was a child, always in whispers, always in fear. They are not Muslim nor Christian. They worship something older, something that was here before any religion we know. She crossed herself, an automatic gesture that revealed her own Christian beliefs. They say they guard a relic, something left by the ancients, and that one day they will use this relic to change the world. Andrew leaned forward. What kind of relic? Nobody knows for sure. Some say it's a crystal, others that it's a book written in a lost language, but everyone agrees on one thing. It has power over the human mind. It can show visions of the future, the past, other worlds, but this power comes at a price. Mariam paused, her hands trembling slightly. To use the relic, the Guardians need a special sacrifice. Not just anyone will do. It needs to be someone pure, someone who has never been corrupted by evil. Lily, Andrew whispered, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in his mind. Your sister was perfect for them, Mariam. Confirmed. Young, innocent, a foreigner, and infatuated with one of them, which made her even more vulnerable. She looked directly at Andrew, her eyes filled with compassion. I'm so sorry, but your sister didn't leave here alive. No one chosen by them does. Andrew felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. For 25 years, he'd held on to a spark of hope that Lily was alive somewhere, perhaps amnesiac, perhaps a prisoner, but alive. Now that hope dissipated like smoke. Where did they kill her? He asked, surprised by the coldness of his own voice. Mariam pointed towards the highest mountains, where only the peaks were visible in the darkness. There's a place up there, the ruins of an ancient temple. That's where they perform their most important rituals. That's where... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Can I get there? No, Mariam said urgently, even before Khalil translated. That place is protected. They have guards, traps, and they say the very ground around the ruins is cursed. Anyone who approaches without permission is never seen again. But Andrew had already made his decision. He'd come too far to give up now. He needed to see the place where Lily had spent her last moments. He needed to fully understand what had happened to her. Perhaps, if he were lucky, he could even find her remains and bring them back to the States for a decent burial. Khalil tried to dissuade him all the way back to the village. Andrew, this is madness. Even if we manage to reach those ruins, what do you expect to find after 25 years? What if those Guardians are still around? Then maybe I can ask them a few questions, Andrew replied with a determination he didn't know he possessed. Maybe it's time someone demanded answers for what they did to my sister. They spent 2 days preparing. Khalil, despite his reservations, proved a loyal companion. He procured topographical maps of the region, basic climbing gear, and through contacts at the university, information about the ruins Mariam had mentioned. Apparently, they were remnants of a Phoenician temple, predating the arrival of Christianity in the region. The site was officially catalogued as an archaeological site, but had never been excavated due to its remote location and the local superstitions surrounding it. The ascent began before dawn, on a misty Tuesday. Andrew carried a backpack with water, food for 2 days, and a digital camera he hoped to use to document anything he found. Khalil carried the maps, a compass, and a satellite phone he'd borrowed from a journalist friend. The trail was steep and treacherous, winding through loose rocks and cliffs that disappeared into the morning mist. After 4 hours of hiking, they reached a plateau where the vegetation became sparser and the air thinner. It was there that Andrew began to feel that something was wrong. It wasn't anything he could rationally explain, just a growing feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to move even when there was no wind, and the silence was so complete that their own heartbeats sounded like drums. "Do you feel that?" he asked Khalil, who hadn't spoken for over an hour. The young Lebanese man nodded nervously. "It's like the air is heavy, like before a storm, but there are no clouds." They continued climbing, following a barely perceptible trail that snaked between increasingly strange rock formations. Andrew began to notice that some of the stones didn't look natural. There were symbols carved into several of them. Symbols that resembled the one he'd seen on Lily's tape. The eye within the star appeared repeatedly, sometimes small and discreet, other times large and elaborate, as if it were a signaling system. It was Khalil who first spotted the ruins. "There," he said, pointing to a stone structure emerging from the mist like the skeleton of some gigantic animal. "My God, it's much larger than we imagined." The temple, if it was indeed a temple, stretched over an area of at least 100 square meters. Its walls, built with perfectly fitted stone blocks, still stood over 3 meters high. In some places, there was no roof, only open sky where a covering should have been. But what most impressed Andrew was the state of preservation. Despite its supposed thousands of years of age, the structure looked as if it had been abandoned. Only decades ago, "Someone's been taking care of this place," Andrew observed, running his hand along a wall where the carved symbols were so sharp they seemed to have been made the previous week. They entered the ruins cautiously, Andrew with his camera in hand, documenting everything. The interior was divided into several chambers, connected by narrow corridors. The central chamber was circular, about 10 meters in diameter, and in the center there was a depression in the stone that formed a kind of altar or well. The surrounding walls were covered in symbols, but these were different from the external ones, more elaborate, more disturbing. It was on the north wall of the central chamber that Andrew found what he was looking for. Engraved in the stone, almost 2 meters high, was the symbol he'd seen on Lily's tape, the eye within the 6-pointed star. But seeing it in person, Andrew noticed details that the grainy quality of the VHS tape hadn't revealed. The eye wasn't just a drawing, there was an actual cavity in the stone, as if someone had excavated a hole and then polished it until it was perfectly round. And inside that cavity, "Khalil," Andrew called, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "Come see this." The young man approached, gasping as he saw what Andrew was observing. Inside the eye socket, something was gleaming. It wasn't metal or crystal, but something that seemed to pulse with its own light, like a distant star seen through a telescope. "Don't touch it," Khalil whispered, but Andrew was already reaching out. The moment his fingers brushed the glowing surface, the world exploded in visions. Andrew saw Lily walking through that same chamber, but she wasn't alone. Samir was there, along with other hooded men. He saw his sister being forced to kneel before the central altar, saw tears streaming down her face as she screamed his name. "Andrew! Andrew, help me!" He saw other things too, images from other times, other places, ancient civilizations, worshipping things that shouldn't be worshipped, rituals that opened doors to dimensions that should have remained closed. And through it all, the eye watched, recorded, waited. Andrew snatched his hand back, gasping and dizzy. Khalil caught him by the arm, preventing him from falling. "What did you see?" the young man asked, but Andrew couldn't form words. The visions still pulsed in his mind like open wounds. That's when they heard voices approaching. "Hide!" Andrew whispered, pushing Khalil behind a stone column. They crouched in the shadows, watching as 3 hooded figures entered the central chamber. They walked in solemn procession, carrying torches that cast dancing shadows on the symbol-covered walls. The man in the front lowered his hood, revealing an aged but still strong face, with intense dark eyes and a carefully trimmed grey beard. When he spoke, it was in English, with a slight Arabic accent, but perfectly understandable. "I know you're there," he said calmly. "There's no need to hide. Come, we have much to discuss." Andrew and Khalil exchanged desperate glances. There was no escape. The entrance to the chamber was blocked by the 3 men, and there didn't seem to be any other exits. "My name is Hassan," the grey-bearded man continued, "and I believe you are Andrew Allen, brother of our dear Lily." Andrew felt the blood run cold in his veins. Slowly, he stepped out from behind the column, his legs trembling. Khalil tried to hold him, but he gently broke free. "You killed her," Andrew said, surprised by the firmness of his own voice. Hassan smiled, but it was a sad smile, devoid of malice. "No, my young friend. I saved her, just as I will save you." "Saved her?" Andrew laughed bitterly. "She was terrified in the video she left. She talked about sacrifices, about rituals. Is that your idea of saving someone?" "You don't understand," Hassan said, approaching slowly. "Lily discovered something she shouldn't have. The veil between worlds is becoming thinner, and there are things on the other side that want to cross over. Our order has existed for 1,000 years to prevent this. Your sister, she had the misfortune of becoming an unwilling conduit." Andrew frowned, trying to process Hassan's words. "What are you talking about?" Hassan gestured to a symbol on the wall. "That relic you touched just now, it's a piece of the original veil, a fragment of the barrier that separates our world from other realities. When certain people come into contact with it, they develop the ability to see through that barrier. And when that happens, the things on the other side begin to see them too." "Lily could see through the veil?" Andrew asked, his voice barely a whisper. "In the last months of her life, yes. She started having visions, waking nightmares. She saw creatures that don't exist in our world, heard voices speaking in languages that were never human. And worst of all, these creatures started to become interested in her." Hassan paused, his eyes fixed on Andrew's. "We didn't kill her, Andrew. We protected her. The final ritual was to seal her connection to the other side, to ensure that the things that were after her couldn't use her as a bridge to enter our world." "Lies!" Andrew shouted. "You're lying." "Am I?" Hassan asked calmly. "Then explain to me why you started having visions the moment you touched the relic. Explain to me why you felt like you're being watched since you arrived in Lebanon. Explain to me why your nights have been filled with nightmares of your sister calling your name." Andrew paled. It was true. Ever since he'd arrived in Lebanon, he'd felt a constant presence, like shadows moving in the corner of his eyes. And the nightmares. God, the nightmares were terrifying. Every night he saw Lily running through impossible landscapes, pursued by things he couldn't see clearly but knew were horrible. "You inherited your sister's gift," Hassan continued. "It's something that runs in families, especially between close siblings. The fact that you managed to find her video, to follow her clues here, that wasn't a coincidence. It was the relic calling you." "No," Andrew whispered, shaking his head. "No, that can't be true." Hassan moved closer, extending his hand. "Come with me. Let me show you something that will clarify everything." Against all his instincts, Andrew followed Hassan into a smaller chamber, adjacent to the central one. Khalil came behind, flanked by the other two hooded men. The smaller chamber was filled with modern equipment: computers, monitors, digital, cameras. It was like finding a high-tech laboratory in the middle of ancient ruins. "Our order has evolved with the times," Hassan explained, switching on one of the monitors. "We still guard the ancient secrets, but we use modern methods when necessary." The monitor screen flickered and showed a video recording. Andrew immediately recognized the setting. It was the same central chamber where they were just moments ago, but the recording was old, probably from the 90s, judging by the image quality. On screen, Lily knelt before the central altar, but she didn't look terrified as Andrew expected. Her eyes were closed and a peaceful expression graced her face. Around her, hooded figures chanted in a language Andrew didn't recognize, yet somehow felt familiar. "Watch," Hassan said gently. In the recording, Lily opened her eyes and looked directly into the camera. When she spoke, her voice was calm, without a trace of the panic Andrew had heard on the VHS tape. "Andrew," she said, and he had to brace himself against the wall to avoid falling. "If you're seeing this, it means you've been called too. I know you must be confused, scared. I was too, but Hassan explained everything to me, and now I understand." She smiled, and it was her sister's smile, genuine and full of love. "What I'm about to do isn't a sacrifice, it's a choice to protect you, our family, our world." Andrew watched, hypnotized, as Lily rose and walked to the wall where the eye symbol was. As she touched the relic, her expression changed. For a moment, her eyes filled with terror, but then a strange serenity washed over her face. "I can see them now," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "The things that want to come through. They're so hungry. Hungry for our world, for our souls." She looked at the camera once more. "I can't let them use our connection to cross over, Andrew. Our sibling bond is too strong. If they can use me as a bridge, you'll be next. And then our parents, and then..." The recording showed Lily placing both hands on the relic. An intense light emanated from the symbol, and for a moment Andrew could swear he saw other shapes in the chamber. Shadows moving independently of any light source, shapes suggesting tentacles, claws, multiple eyes. "I seal them," Lily said, her voice now multiple, as if several people were speaking at once. "I close the door. I pay the price." The light intensified, blinding the camera, and when the image returned to normal, Lily had vanished. Only the hooded figures remained, kneeling in silent prayer. "Where is she?" Andrew asked, tears streaming down his face. "She has become part of the veil," Hassan replied calmly. "Her essence has been merged with the barrier between worlds, strengthening it. She didn't die, Andrew. She transformed into something greater, an eternal guardian." Andrew felt his legs weaken. Why did she do that?" "Because she loved you more than her own life, and because she knew that if she didn't act, the things on the other side would eventually find a way to reach you." Hassan switched off the monitor and turned to Andrew. "And now you are here. You touched the relic, opened your own connection to the other side. The same creatures that pursued your sister now know of your existence. They will seek you out, Andrew. No matter where you go, they will find you." "So what are you suggesting?" Andrew asked, though he already knew the answer. "You have two choices," Hassan said. "You can follow your sister's example and sacrifice yourself to permanently seal the connection. Or you can join us, learn our methods, and spend the rest of your life fighting to keep the veil intact." Andrew looked around the chamber filled with modern equipment, trying to process everything he had discovered. His sister hadn't been a victim. She had been a heroine. She hadn't died. She had become something more. And now he faced the same choice she had faced 25 years earlier. "What if I just leave?" he asked. "What if I go back to the States and try to forget all this?" Hassan shook his head sadly. "You can try, but they will follow you. And this time it won't just be you in danger. It will be everyone you love. Your children, your ex-wife, your friends. The connection you opened cannot be closed simply by ignoring it." Andrew thought of his children, Peter and Anna, only 12 and 10 years old. He thought of Carla, who despite their divorce still cared for him. He thought of all the innocents who could be affected by a decision he had made, without fully understanding its consequences. "If I join you," he said slowly, "can I protect them?" "Yes," Hassan confirmed. "Our order has methods to protect the families of our members. Your children will never know the danger they were in, but they will be safe. And I could see Lily again." Hassan paused before answering. "In a sense, yes. Those who are connected to the veil can sometimes communicate with those who have become part of it. But she won't be the sister you knew. She will be something more. Andrew closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would change his life forever. When he opened them again, his resolution was made. What do I need to do? The next few days passed in a blur. Hassan and the other members of the order, Andrew learned there were only 12 in total, scattered across the Middle East and Europe, taught him about the true nature of reality. They showed him ancient texts that described the creatures from the other side, taught him protective rituals and meditation techniques that could help him control his increasingly frequent visions. Khalil, initially terrified by everything he had witnessed, decided to stay as well. Someone needs to document this, he said. And if these things are real, then the world needs people prepared to face them. But it was during his third night in the ruins that Andrew had his first real communication with Lily. He was meditating in the central chamber, following Hassan's instructions, when he felt a familiar presence approach. "Andrew," a voice whispered in his mind, and he knew instantly it was her. "Lily?" he replied, not knowing if he was speaking aloud or just thinking. "I'm here, man. I've always been here." The voice was hers, but there was something more, like echoes of other voices speaking at once. "I'm so sorry for everything. I know you suffered looking for me." "Why didn't you tell me?" Andrew asked, tears streaming down his face. "Why did you let me believe you'd been murdered?" "Because I needed you to live your life. I needed you to be happy, to have a family, to have children. I only let myself be found when I knew they were coming to look for you anyway." "They?" Andrew felt, more than saw, Lily pointing beyond the limits of physical reality. At the edge of his perception, shadowy forms moved like sharks around a shipwreck, patiently waiting for an opportunity. "They sense the connection between us," Lily explained. "Our sibling bond is like a beacon to them. They've tried to use me to get to you for years, but the seal I created kept them at bay, now that you touched the relic." "I opened a new door," Andrew finished, finally understanding the magnitude of his situation. "But now you can choose. You can do what I did, sacrifice yourself to permanently seal the connection, or you can learn to control it, to use it to protect others they might pursue in the future." Andrew didn't hesitate. "I want to learn. I want to protect our children, our families. I want to make a difference like you did." He felt Lily smile, a warmth spreading through his chest. "I knew you'd choose this. You've always been the protector of the family, even when we were kids. Will I be able to talk to you again?" "When you need me, I'll be here. I'll always be here." Lily's presence slowly faded, leaving Andrew alone in the silent chamber. But it wasn't an empty loneliness. It was as if she'd left some of her strength with him, some of her resolve. 3 months later, Andrew returned to the States, but he wasn't the same man who had left. He carried with him ancient knowledge and responsibilities he couldn't share with anyone outside the order. Hassan had given him contacts in Chicago and other cities, other members of the organization monitoring paranormal activities in the States. "Our war is silent," Hassan had told him on the day of his departure. "The world can't know it exists because fear would only make things worse. But we know, and we work in the shadows to keep the darkness where it belongs." The house in Oakhaven had been sold during his absence, but Andrew felt no nostalgia. That house held memories of a previous life, of a man who believed reality was simple and predictable. Now he knew better. He settled in Chicago, close to his children, but not too close to put them in danger. He returned to working as an accountant, a mundane profession that provided perfect cover for his real activities. At night and on weekends, he investigated strange occurrences, helped people who had experiences they couldn't explain, and gradually built a network of informants and allies. It was during one of these investigations, almost a year after his return, that Andrew discovered he hadn't returned from Lebanon alone. He was investigating a series of collective nightmares in an East Side neighborhood when he noticed the symbol It was etched discreetly on the wall of a school where several children had reported the same disturbing dreams. The eye within the six-pointed star, small and almost invisible, but unmistakably familiar. Andrew photographed the symbol and sent it to Hassan via encrypted email. The reply arrived in under an hour. "Evacuate the area immediately. They've found you." But it was too late. When Andrew got home that night, he found the same mark carved into the wood of his door. It wasn't just a drawing, it had been cut into the wood with surgical precision, still smelling of fresh wood. Inside the house, everything seemed normal at first glance, but Andrew had learned to trust his instincts, sharpened by the order. The temperature was a few degrees lower than normal. The shadows seemed darker, denser, and there was a smell in the air, sweet and sickening like rotting flowers. That's when he heard the voice. "Andrew," someone called from inside the apartment. A female voice, familiar, loving, Lily's voice. But Andrew knew it wasn't her. The real Lily could only communicate with him through deep meditation, and her presence was always accompanied by warmth and peace. This was different. This was cold, hungry, predatory. "Andrew, my brother," the voice called again, coming from the bedroom. "Why don't you come see me? I've missed you so much." Andrew grabbed his phone and dialed the emergency number Hassan had given him. They answered on the first ring. "Code Veil," he whispered. "They've found me." 40 minutes, the voice replied. "Hold tight." Andrew hung up and prepared for the fight of his life. The creatures from the other side had finally found a way to cross over, using their connection to Lily as a bridge. But they hadn't counted on one thing. Andrew was no longer the naive man who had left for Lebanon in search of his sister. He was a guardian of the Veil, trained to face exactly this situation. "Lily isn't here anymore," he said aloud, walking toward the bedroom with a protective amulet in his hand. "And you're not welcome in my world." The response was a roar that shook the windows and woke the neighbors from their sleep. The war had begun. 40 minutes later, when the other members of the Order arrived at Andrew's apartment, they found him sitting on the floor of the living room, exhausted but alive. The apartment was in ruins, as if it had been hit by a hurricane, but the creatures had been banished back to the other side. "How did you do it?" asked Maria, a woman in her 50s who led the American cell of the Order. Andrew smiled faintly. "Lily helped me, the real Lily. She taught me a ritual that's not in any of the ancient texts. A ritual that can only be performed by someone with a familial connection to someone on the other side of the veil." He looked at the mark on the door, which was now slowly fading. "They won't give up," he said, "but they won't catch me off guard again." In the years that followed, Andrew became one of the most important members of the Order in the Western Hemisphere. He developed new techniques for detecting incursions from the other side, established a surveillance network that spanned all of South America, and trained dozens of new recruits. But most importantly, he maintained regular contact with Lily. She had become his consultant from beyond, warning him of threats and guiding him in particularly dangerous situations. Their connection, which could have been the ruin of them both, transformed into the Order's most powerful weapon against the creatures that constantly tried to invade the human world. On a cold winter night, 5 years after his return from Lebanon, Andrew was in his new apartment, well protected and surrounded by protective symbols, when he felt Lily's familiar presence approaching. "Thank you," she said, her voice echoing in his mind with more clarity than ever before. "For what?" Andrew asked. "For finding me, for understanding, for choosing to protect instead of running away." He could feel her smile, that smile he'd known since childhood. "Mom and Dad would have been proud of us both." "Do you think they know where they are?" "I'm sure they know. And they know they didn't lose a daughter. They gained 2 guardians who will protect the family forever." Andrew looked out the window at the city sprawling below, millions of people sleeping peacefully, unaware of the dangers lurking in the shadows between worlds. Dangers that he and Lily, each in their own way, protected them from. Forever, he agreed, and for the first time in 30 years, he felt truly at peace. The story of the Allen siblings was far from over, but it was no longer a story of loss and searching. It was a story of protection, of love that transcends death, and of the choice to use personal suffering to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In the darkness of the Chicago night, Andrew continued his eternal vigil, knowing that somewhere beyond the veil between worlds, Lily continued hers. Together, as they were always destined to be, and in the shadows that danced through the city, streets, other creatures waited patiently for their next opportunity, unaware that two siblings who loved each other more than life itself were ready to stop them. The silent war continued, as it always would. But as long as there was true love in the world, as long as there were people willing to sacrifice themselves to protect others, the creatures of darkness would never completely prevail. And in Oak Haven, now just another small town in the Midwest, the elders still tell stories about the girl who left for a distant country and never returned. But they don't know that she never really left. She simply changed form and continues to protect all, those she loves forever.